What is up, everybody? My name is Adam Gellman. Welcome to the first ever post-match brawl. This time, I'm going to be taking a look at WWE Prizm, a set that I really have enjoyed since its release last April, and something that I've been building a lot of my personal collection around as I chase down cards of my favorite people. But I wanted to take some time today to go through a little bit more context around the product because it's become a very controversial subject for most WWE collectors, mainly as the industry has shifted away from what usually happens in the wrestling industry to what it is right now. And I want to go through some of the context from the other side of the hobby, which is the mainstream stick and ball sports, where Prism really found its roots. So I want to take this sort of next opportunity here to give wrestling collectors an understanding that maybe they didn't have, maybe they did have, but really this is where I think a lot of the purpose of Prism really was lost on a lot of people, and it's become this sort of uh, situation where anytime it's brought up, anytime it's praised, it creates a ton of discussion, which I love to see. And here is an opportunity for me to sort of add some thoughts long form without having to worry about character limits on Twitter, without having to sort of burn out my hands typing thousands of words, of which I did before. You can find a lot of my content on Prism on my website for www.sportscardsuncensored.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at SCUncensored and on Instagram at WWE Gellman. So with that, let's get started. And the way I want to start this off is really about the history of the Chrome cards and why Prism became the hobby standard, the hobby flagship set. So back in the early 90s and mid 90s, Topps really created this as a premium opportunity for collectors to engage, where Upper Deck had just released their first baseball set. It was released in 1989. It was a premium stock product. It was a hobby splash. To this day, those cards are widely collected. And by 1993 and 1994, Topps was looking for an answer. And what they did was they created a product called Topps Finest, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with by now because it was released in 2020 for the first time in WWE and went over very, very well. And then after that, they took Topps Finest and started branching off into other brands like Topps Chrome, which has become a hobby standard in its own right. Bowman and the Bowman brands have Chrome elements that continue to be some of the most sought after rookie cards available on the market. And when Topps was sort of building up their brand loyalty around this, many collectors saw Chrome as the rookie card to chase, the card to have. And as we got into the contrived scarcity of the late mid to late 2000s and the early part of 2010s, we started to see the parallel structure from Bowman, which drove huge sales for rookie cards, transfer over into other sports, mostly in Topps Chrome, where Topps, leading up to their loss of the basketball license in around the 2009 2010 season, really sort of focused a lot on football before they lost that as well in 2015. So how does Prism sort of fit into this? Well, that's where Panini's takeover of the Donruss Leaf playoff brands within the hobby really start to take shape. So Panini, the national Panini group is from Italy, and a group of people from the U.S. side wanted to bring the Panini brand to the U.S. and get more access to funds, more access to budget, more access to creating premium cards for a market that was quickly becoming more about high end than anything else. Upper Deck had released Exquisite Collection at $500 a box for the first time in 2003, LeBron James's rookie year, and ever since that point, the prices of keeping yourself in the hobby was going up and up and up and up and up. And Topps tried to do it on their side as well. They released things like Paradigm, which was a complete flop, or they released Topps 5 Star, which a lot of people have to this day still love. So, I mean, like they've all had, every card company really tried to sort of jump onto the bandwagon of creating premium products for the hobby. Well, when Panini America was eventually established and took over the NBA license, they also gained access to the football side of it through DLP's existing NFL license and decided that they wanted to mirror what Topps was doing on the Chrome side with the creation of a set that mirrored a lot of what Chrome was all about. So they created Prizm, which was released in football the year Andrew Luck, the year Russell Wilson was a rookie. That was their first foray into the Prizm market. And it wasn't successful. Like, for the most part, in 2012, all the way up through, the 2014, 2015 releases in football, really didn't have a lot of a following. And the reason is because Chrome was still around and Chrome was still the collector standard. But the release of Prizm in basketball was really the beginning of the sort of ascent to the top of the hobby that a lot of collectors would be indoctrinated into as the boom started in 2020. So really, when Topps then exited the football market and Panini was left alone in 2015, past the end of 2015 for the release of 2016 Prizm, that was the only chromium style product on the market for football that year. It was also released in basketball, which meant that collectors who were crossing over between the two sports had now a shared universe of Prizm with designs and everything, delivering huge value because there wasn't a Chrome to compete. Then we're going to fast forward even further to the beginning of 2017 and 2018, where in basketball you had a rookie who changed a lot of the way collectors were looking at cards as an asset for their marketplace, and that person is Luka Doncic. And Luka had an explosion in the NBA because he played so well so quickly, paired with Patrick Mahomes on the football side, winning a Super Bowl in his second year. Like, all of these things sort of came together to create this perfect storm of Prizm rookies being a standard to replace Topps Chrome. So over that next few years until the beginning of the boom, collectors would come into the hobby in the two most popular premium sports, which is the NFL and the NBA, seeing that their favorite players only had rookie cards in Prizm, and that there was a contrived scarcity that prevented some of the parallels of those cards from being readily available. Well, at the same time, you had Topps still on the baseball side creating Chrome sets and on Star Wars and eventually WWE, eventually UFC. Like, all of these things were sort of happening at the same time, and it created this like perfect storm. Now, let's look at the sort of makeup of the WWE market and why that was such a big deal. So, WWE for a long time was about two things. One was about player collecting, and the other thing was about autographs. So, for a concept of Prizm where most of the value is derived from the parallels of the base cards, especially the rookies, it's not really going to jive with a market that's all about autographs, because the autographs in Prizm really don't have the same appeal to the investor population that came in to Prizm as their flagship product. And it doesn't really mesh well with the way WWE collectors have really sort of participated in the hobby over the course of their existence. So for a long time, the WWE was a very inexpensive niche part of the hobby. And I joined around 2016, 2017, where I became kind of disenfranchised with football collecting. That was my love. I had some basketball, I had some baseball. I was really a stick and ball collector. And what I did was I came into WWE because my son actually started watching wrestling again. I loved wrestling growing up. I was a huge fan of the Attitude Era. So I was like, sure, let's take a look. Let's see how things have changed. And I had generally kept up with kind of who the big names in WWE were. I wasn't absent-minded of Cena or Bray Wyatt or the big names, Randy Orton, people like that had really made a name for themselves, as well as kind of like the growth of the women's division in WWE as well. I was indoctrinated mostly because of Top Slam, actually, which was a digital card app that Topps had put out. But yeah, I kept up with it. And so when I came back in 2016, I was like, oh my God, WWE cards are, around, and they mirror a lot of what's going on in the other sports that I love so much. I also realized that the hobby comparatively was exponentially more expensive in the mainstream than it was in WWE. A box of contenders at that point was costing $400 to $500, and you could buy an entire case of WWE for that price. More importantly, the singles of the people that you wanted to buy were usually under $100. So to me, it was like a no-brainer. I could get involved and I could get going without spending much money. Now, when when Prism and the boom really started taking off, that's when everything changed hobby wide. And the reason is because so many more people came in, so many more people brought eyes to the hobby, and it created an investment class asset that really wasn't the case before, unless you had the top 0.0001% of the cards that were out there, the old vintage stuff, Mickey Mantle, the high end sort of autograph rookie cards of people like Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, LeBron James, like you name it. Most of the time, cards didn't really explode until Prism really took hold as the main sort of hobby flagship product in partnership with National Treasures, in partnership with Flawless, sets that really mirrored what Panini was trying to accomplish as they entered the American market, which is create a premium brand for premium collectors. So the boom was a huge deal at the beginning of COVID because we saw a number of people not spending money on vacations. We saw people not spending money on the things they would normally spend money on because they couldn't access outside. And so what they did is they put that money into cards, and it drove things insane. Thankfully, it didn't really happen the same way in WWE because it was still a very niche part of the hobby. And when we take a look at how that pertains to the collecting marketplace in WWE, cards were still very inexpensive at that point. They hadn't really gotten to a point where the mainstream hobby, where the investment pieces were minimum six figures at that point, on their way up, put a bet on the table, it wins. Like those types of things happened all the time. And the prices were going up after each and every sale. And WWE was relatively flat. Now, in 2018 and 2019, the product lines for Topps sort of took a dip, and there wasn't a lot of budget spent on WWE at Topps. They were focused on baseball. They were focused on keeping the brands alive. They were going through some sales of their business. It was sold to a group of people that run Disney, and then it was put on the market again, and then all of these things sort of contributed to sort of things in wrestling going like this. Now, around 2020, when the hobby started to take off again, Topps decided it was time to invest some money in their brands that weren't baseball. And Topps decided that WWE was going to be a focus brand for them and put a lot of money into creating a Chrome set, creating a Finest set, continuing with Undisputed, which was their main premium product, but also releasing Transcendent, which is a humongous cost increase over the usual sort of WWE product. So WWE collectors in 2019 were exposed to really the premium side of the hobby, front and center with their experience in Transcendent. But most of the people didn't like that, and they didn't like it because historically WWE had not been a valuable asset. It was more of a collecting asset. And it was something that drove a lot of people to sort of build giant collections, get involved at a very inexpensive price. And when Transcendent hits the market at $12,000 a box, everything changes. So in 2021, Panini announced pretty early on in the year that WWE was going to be coming out as part of their brand right away. So you had the announcement that I released on Twitter probably in February, March timeframe, because it was a widely kept, secret, but people in cards love to talk. I had received messages from a number of different people, and I reported that Panini had acquired the WWE license. Then in later, around the Halloween timeframe, like where we are right now, Panini actually made the announcement official. Now, what happened between the beginning of 2021 and the beginning of or in the April of 2022, which was the release of Prism, was an insanely steep slide upwards of kind of how WWE was seen in the investor market. So immediately you had people from the other sports seeing what happened in UFC, which was another brand that Panini had launched recently, taken from Topps, immediately put out a Prism product, and seen prices go like this. So you had people who had experience outside of WWE and outside of this new debut, seeing what happens when a Prism product hits the market. And all of those people immediately decided it was time to start pushing money into the WWE market. So from November, especially through the release of Prism, you saw every Chrome product, every WWE finest card, all of the singles, all of the wax just immediately shoot up in value. You had superfractors that were selling for $20 and $30, now crossing $200 and $300. You had the top end cards selling for five figures. To that point, there really hadn't been a gigantic modern sale. Like there was a couple of cards that had touched $4,000 and $5,000 in WWE, 101 masterpiece type cards, collection centerpieces. But for the most part, until Transcendent hit the market and the Vince McMahon Superfractor really sold, like there really hadn't been a huge sale in modern WWE. And the boom hadn't touched the industry. So it really wasn't something that was expected. But as soon as Panini makes this announcement, the Vince McMahon Superfractor from Transcended 2021 sells for $9,000. The Roman Reigns 2014 Chrome Superfractor sells for $15,000. The Chrome Rock cards start quadrupling and quintupling in price. The Roman Reigns autographs start quintupling in price. Like everything was hand over fist going up, 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 up. In the meantime, WWE collectors were revolting because they had seen their dark corner of the hobby start to become more and more expensive. And it was a problem. So then, as we get into the Prizm release, the first pre orders go on sale, and many distributors sort of got Prizm at a cost of probably pretty cheap. I would say maybe even under $150 a box, closer to $100. And immediately, because of speculation, posted those boxes at $750 a piece. Within days, all of those allocations that were given to them Panini were sold out. And we were sold out from speculative buyers who came in, saw what happened in UFC, and then from there had major implications about how they engage with products overall. So when you think about the importance that Prizm had in the market, that was it. It was all about creating this flagship product. And you think about how the general hobby views Prizm. They view it as the first product to really drive an investment level crowd. So when WWE was a debut item for them, of course, that was exactly what happened. So let's talk about why that wax price went as high as it did. UFC, at the same time Prizm was coming out, was their initial release in the hobby was trading at about $2,000 a box. So when WWE was put at $750, less than half of that, a lot of people jumped in and they were ready to sort of buy up as much of it as can. In fact, they bought through so many allocations that the initial hobby retailers had that it drove the price over $1,000, as close to $1,500. And Prizm's not meant to be a product like that. Prizm's not meant, WWE Prizm especially was not meant to be a product like that. It had a huge checklist. It had a ton of people in there that weren't going to drive value in the investor crowd. And people were speculating on how the market was going to react to Prizm before anybody had seen what was going to happen with WWE as a license for Panini. So overall, you had this entire group of collectors that were driving at um, a market that hadn't been established yet. Now, people like me were saying, hey, this is what happened in UFC. This is what happened with WNBA, which their debut Prizm product, despite nobody watching their show, went through the roof. I was saying, hey, this is a likely expectation for us overall that when we get into these products, when we get into these WWE products, we could see similar projections happen here. We could see cards from the debut Prizm products sell in huge amounts of money. And immediately, that's exactly what happened. You had a ton of people from outside the WWE join the WWE hobby, buy huge cards, golds, blacks, all the low numbered desirable cards were going for five figures off the bat. And then when people started to see that the bottom part of the product who weren't going to keep up, the wax started to dip. And that's expected. That's what happens with Prizm pretty much every time. Because LeBron James, Luka Doncic, all of those top level players, they sell up here. And the bench players, the people that sit 12th on the Lakers bench, are still in Prism and they don't sell very well. And the same thing happens in every product because not everybody is a superstar. But the desirable cards sell for a ton of money. And that's continues to be what happened for Prism even now. So let's look at then the timing in which this set came out, because around the same time frame, Prism was up here and the market started to take a dip. And they took a dip because crypto crash, uh, Bitcoin went down, Ethereum went down, all of the monetary elements of a lot of the economy that funds card purchases took a dive. And I had said since the beginning of the boom that when the eventual sort of peak happens and things start coming down the other side, the first things to go would be kind of the fringe elements that people were buying just to see if it would be a winner. And that's exactly what happened. We saw people starting to sell off in record time frame because WWE was never a mainstream brand. It was always on the fringe. It was always niche. And because it was a niche part of the hobby, the people that were there and seeing their investments in other parts of the market go completely bust were pulling out of this market exceptionally fast, as I would too if I had investments that were doing that too. Now, in the meantime, you had people on social media who were saying, "Hey, this is all this is all a pump and dump. This is all all of these types of things." I really don't think that that's exactly what happened, because a lot of the pump and dumps that happen with specific cards, and they happen with graded cards, and they happen with specific individuals. Here it was more of like a market that was taking it all the way up through the end of November in 2021, all the way through the release of Prism. You had a ton of people in there buying up cards. There was hundreds of new. I manage one of the largest Facebook groups. I'm a moderator there. We went from seeing 2 to 3 requests for membership a month, all the way up to like 100 requests for membership a week. So you had tons of new people coming in, all because Panini had announced that they were going to be joining the WWE marketplace. And it really wasn't like a contrived sort of like pump and dump, because there was just too many people that were driving the price up. You saw a ton of things happen with Chrome. You saw a ton of things happen with Finest. Wax prices were going up. Then you saw Prism follow the same path. But because the economy, went in the toilet, like everybody decided that this fringe area of the hobby was a place that they were going to exit first. And I don't blame them. So we had cards that were selling for $1,000 all of a sudden start selling for $200. You had the bulk unnumbered cards that were readily available in both retail and hobby take a complete nosedive into the floor. Like, all of those things should be expected when an economy does what it does, and when a hobby market starts to do what it does, because since that time frame the hobby as a whole has come down absolutely in the same manner that Prism has. Now, Prism Wax went from $1,500 a box, now around $250, $300 a box. And again, that's still double what the MSRP is suggested to be at 150 bucks. So there's still a lot of value in Prism. And the reason that there's a lot of value in Prism is because the rare and desirable cards continue to sell for an insane amount of money. If you look at whether it's the lowest of the low versus the highest of the high, the cards for them that sell in Prism are record prices. We saw the Rocks cards sell for the record prices multiple times, even as recently as the beginning of October 2022. You've seen the Rocks rarest cards set records in the private sales that went down for his black. You saw blacks and golds prisms sell for insane amounts of money for Ultimate Warrior, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, you name it, they sold an insane amount above where they would normally be selling. Overall, Prism was an exceptional success, but it's still a very controversial product because it changed the marketplace for WWE. And I have said on a number of occasions that Prism is a standard, and it is, because if you look at the way the hobby views this product, it is the flagship for everything. And I've said that a number of times during this video because the greater hobby continues to have a humongous affinity for shiny cards. And when you look at something like Select, which came out after Prism, even that saw a huge increase over similar cards in the Topps releases because everybody loves these cards. And when I look at the WWE collector based response to Prism, people immediately rejected it because it saw the introduction of investors into a market where investors were very, very slim and few and far between. It was a slim margin before, now it was a gigantic price increase. And all of a sudden, the fun and cheap hobby that we all loved became an investor haven. And that drove people crazy. And it's funny because we always talk about like, hey, we want to grow the hobby, we want more people to collect WWE cards, but in reality, when that happened, it was only the people that collected the same way we did that we wanted to be. We didn't want them to come in and change things. We wanted them to come and join and do it the way we did it. It's just not the way it works. And it's unfortunate that people had such a negative reaction to this product because for a lot of people, it had great photos, had a great design. Some of these cards are awesome. You look at the color blast, you look at the champion signatures. They're some of my favorite WWE cards ever released. And people don't give them a chance in the WWE collector base because it signifies something to them that they didn't like, a change in the hobby. That exact same feeling took over in 2013, 2014, 2015, the mainstream hobby, because the exact same thing happened there too. We started to see cards as an investment class asset, and all of a sudden, tons of new people came streaming in and wanting to take advantage of making money. And Prism was just one of those things that happened to be a very similar approach, and a lot of really curious things happened. You saw people who had built a following in WWE start to revolt against the Prism product because in reality it challenged a lot of what they had built up and it challenged their place atop the pile. And so the agenda sort of took hold, and the agenda of growing the hobby and the agenda of like, hey, this is going to be the future, it's going to be here for a while, like let's really get behind this and take advantage of all the new eyes to show them how fun the WWE community is. Instead, it was completely the opposite. They wanted to drive out the investors, they wanted to drive out the people that were joining the hobby, even though a lot of them stayed through Select, stayed through Impeccable, which was just released. Like, I've become friendly with a lot of these people, and they continue to collect WWE cards because they are fun. It is fun to collect in this community, and this community makes it fun, except for when you start praising Prism. So the reason that the violence in the violent reaction that people have to Prism getting praised is frankly frustrating because it doesn't deserve that. The people who support it came in and changed the hobby for a lot of reasons that was going to happen regardless if Prism was released or not. And it's unfortunate that people didn't see that as an opportunity to increase the equity in their own collections, use that equity to acquire more pieces that they've been wanting for a long time, or if they're not going to do any of those things, at least make some new contacts around the hobby, learn about how the Prism marketplace exists in other sports. Like, that was a shocking experience for me, was that not only did people not have the context of why Prism is what it is, but they didn't want to learn and they actively avoided that education. And that's unfortunate. Like, if you're spending the kind of money that most of us do on cards, like, I would expect that more people would want to learn about why the hobby is what it is. One of the most sort of fervent sort of responses to Prism is say it's not special. Like, why is this product special? And that's a loaded question. That's a very loaded question. And the reason that it's so special is because of all of that history and because of that sort of brand loyalty through the legacy of what it's brought to the hobby. Like, in the mainstream, Prism is a major factor, and it is a major sort of release every single year. And as a result, when it's released in a new sport, you can imagine why people are immediately going to pick it up, because they see what happens in the other sports. They see how important it is there, and they think, hey, this could be important too. So the speculation around it was pretty big, including from a lot of WWE collectors who saw the writing on the wall and said, like, hey, this is an opportunity to get some cards, to make some money, and use that money to increase my PC, which is exactly what I did. So I think the challenge that most people feel around collecting Prism is that they don't see it as a special product. I get it. It does look a lot like Chrome. It does look a lot like Finest because it's on the Chrome stock, but Chrome and Finest have a lot of the same sort of market reactions that Prism does. Chrome and Finest continue to be investor favorites on the baseball side where they're released. And when Fanatics takes over in 2026 with the NFL, the NBA, and others, it could be even sooner if the rumors of a buyout of Panini go through. You're going to see a lot of that stuff transfer over because Topps Chrome will start releasing in NFL, in NBA for the first time in a decade. And you're going to see that collectors are going to run to those products because they love what Chrome represents. And a lot of the agendas that exist on WWE collectors' social media is about preserving their place within the market. And I understand the survival mechanism that goes into place because a lot of the values on the stuff that they collect have been going down with the rest of the hobby as well. So, I mean, like you're seeing huge changes go through. And for a lot of collectors that didn't go through this in the mainstream sports, it's easy to see why that is such a negative experience. So, in closing, like here's what I think is going to happen long term. Prism's going to be here for years. Whether Fanatics buys out Panini, takes over the Prism license, takes over the WWE license, and releases it under the Fanatics banner for years to come, this is going to be the first of many. Even if the license, as it's planned to do right now in the last 4 or 5 years, goes back to Fanatics and Topps, there's still 4 or 5 more of these to come. There's still a lot of huge names that haven't had Prism cards. We're talking about Cody Rhodes. We're talking about Ronda Rousey, Randy Savage. All of those people have not had Prism cards. So next year's Prism is going to be a widely collected product, just like it was this year. They will have more opportunity to build it because as we saw their license start January 1, the product was released for 1. So you have like 4 months to build a Chrome style product. That's not a lot of time, considering the time to take and build the cards is huge. But then now you have a full years of lead up. You have market reaction. You have all of these things taking place. Panini's going to use that information to make this product even better. You might see the introduction of things like on-card autographs. You might see the introduction of relics. You're going to see new parallels that are hobby standards, like the Nebula parallels. You're going to see stuff like that, which weren't a part of this, take hold in the new next year's Prism set. You're going to see other things like Select and Chronicles and other things that will have Chrome style releases. It's all going to build to a very large crescendo. And whether or not that impacts the value is still yet to be seen because there's still a huge question mark around the hobby of whether values are going to continue to stay the same or continue to go down. And if the hobby continues to go down and if the hobby continues to take a nosedive as the economy sort of does as well, things could get a lot worse before they get better. But I think 5 years from now, 7 years from now, as we look back on this product, it's already started to dry up. A lot of the cards that were readily available at release are no longer readily available. The tens of thousands of auctions that were posted are no longer there. The buy it nows are there, but they're pretty high. Like all of these things for the desirable cards will contribute to sort of this storied experience of like, if I want to buy a gold Stone Cold Steve Austin, if I want to buy the top level desirable cards in this product, it's going to be expensive and it's going to be expensive long term, especially for the desirable stuff, especially for the rare stuff. If it's both, it's even more. Like all of those things are main parts of why Prism is such a huge thing in the hobby nationwide, internationally even. And that's not going to change. And the agendas of people who want to say, hey, Prism is terrible, Prism is bad for WWE, I don't necessarily think that they're all that wrong because it changes a lot of what made WWE awesome for us. But with more eyes comes more budget, comes more focus from the manufacturers, comes better cards, comes more people to talk to, comes more of a debate. Like there are good things that come out of that. So, and not to mention, this wasn't a bad product. Like it had QC issues, it had collation issues, as most Panini products do. It had some defects, but overall, the cards look great, the sets look great, the values were record setting. Like I don't see how that wasn't a success. So overall, like for me personally, Prism was fun. I spent a ton of time collecting it. I've for my PC, I've collected my person to the ends of the earth and beyond. And those things aren't going to change because I love Chrome cards. I love shiny cards. And there is a huge contingent of collectors in the hobby that feel the same way. So if you feel like, hey, Prism is getting too much attention, Prism is doing the wrong things for the hobby, I understand and I get it. But I also feel like you're probably not taking as much of a wider open mind as you probably should. And I think this narrow viewpoint is really going to hurt things long term, especially if your agenda is to grow the hobby and your agenda is to grow wrestling cards like mine has been from the beginning. And, the whole situation of complaining about the way the hobby is changing isn't unique to WWE. And you'll see that it didn't have any effect on any other part of the hobby where those complaints were raised either. So that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. I love having these types of conversations. I love talking with people, and I love the debate, even if those debates tend to be at my own expense. I love when people disagree. I love when people sort of bring these types of situations to the forefront of the conversation for a number of reasons. And I hope that we continue to have this. I'm going to continue to do these videos about some of the controversial things in the hobby. And I hope that we get an opportunity to have more debate as a result of this video. Thanks again, everybody.